They had U.S. troops go in and take over these plantation lands so that these fucking corporations could make money off of selling bananas. They toppled governments for fucking bananas.
This is the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast, where you get an understanding of our culture that isn't limited by neoliberal woke universities. I'm Sam, and I'm here to speak to you, the person that wants to be informed and involved with your culture and community, but doesn't trust mainstream academia. I'm doing this because I quit my teaching program so that I could do this podcast and talk about what I really wanted to talk about, not what was selected for me to teach. Today, how do corporations fit into our culture? How do they function? What is their relationship to us? And how can we use that to benefit us?
So to start, I'm just going to read the simple definition from a website called Investopedia, which is really good for getting basic investing information if you want to be an investor. But it's also good for definitions, very simple technical definitions of things related to finance. So they say that a corporation is this. A corporation is a legal entity that is separate and distinct from its owners. Under the law, corporations possess many of the same rights and responsibilities as individuals. They can enter contracts, loan and borrow money, sue and be sued, hire employees, own assets, and pay taxes. Some refer to a corporation as a legal person. Some of you might remember about, 12 years ago? No, 10? Jeez, yeah, 10 years ago, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney famously was like, corporations are people, my friend. And everyone made fun of him, but he was right. And people made fun of him because they're like, what are you talking about? Corporations aren't people. But they fucking are. They're treated as people by the court system. And everybody should know that, because you should know the treatment that corporations are getting in our country and how you can benefit from that information.
The fact that a corporation is separate from its owners is extremely important because it allows the owners to act unethically but be protected from legal liability while acting for that corporation. It's hard for them to be sued. This means that if you own a delivery company and your delivery driver falls asleep at the wheel and runs a school bus full of nuns into the Rio Grande, your personal assets, all your money, your cars, your houses, everything is protected, except for the stuff that the corporation owns, because they're like a separate entity from you. There are a few types of corporations. The most basic is an LLC, limited liability corporation, which is very simple and common to set up. I even have one. A lot of people do. But what we're going to be talking about is large publicly traded corporations, and they're owned by shareholders that own stock in that company. This is anything from Apple to Nike to Disney, Microsoft, all the big ones that you know. There's a few notable exceptions, like I think Twitter was just made private, as in you can't buy the stock to Twitter, by Elon Musk. So that's no longer a public corporation, but almost all, like 95, 96, 97% of them of the largest ones are publicly traded companies. So you can own these. Many of you probably do. I do. If you own stock, if you own maybe an index fund, you own a piece of a lot of different companies. And then you are one of the owners of that company, but you're not legally responsible. So just completely hypothetically, if Nike or Apple was using slave labor from an ethnic group that was having a genocide committed against them in concentration camps, then they would be limited in that liability. So the owners and the people, the owners, which is the stockholders, and the people that are employees of Apple who run the company, including the executives, if they were to, for example, use that slave labor from the people who have a genocide committed against them to create cheap shoes and Apple products, then they wouldn't have any legal responsibility when they do that. So that's really good because it allows for genocide to happen and for us to get, shoes for $10 cheaper. So that's great. So we're not going to get too far into the specifics of how a corporation is structured, but we need to know a little bit. The corporation is owned by the shareholders. It's split up between the shareholders. And the high-level employees, I'm talking the officers in the corporation. We're talking about a CEO. You've probably heard of this, a chief executive officer. This is kind of like the top guy or girl, top man or woman in charge of the corporation. They're the top dog. There's also CFOs, which is a chief financial officer, CTOs, chief technical officer, and like all these different positions, senior vice presidents, things like that. These are fiduciaries. And what a fiduciary is somebody who's legally in line with your interests. So in this context, it means that these officers are legally required to act in the best interest of the company and by extension, the shareholders. They are legally not allowed to do things that hurt the company because that would be hurting the shareholders and that would be hurting their fiduciary responsibility. Another example that might be more clear to people is if you have a good financial advisor, somebody who is handling your money, you always want to make sure that they are a fiduciary to you, which means that their interests are aligned with yours. So if they make money, you make money. You don't want a financial advisor who is not a fiduciary because then you are not the person they are working for. They are working for someone else. So all actions taken by this corporation and by extension taken by its officers legally, because the officers are the people that make up the corporation, they are legally, I can't stress this enough, legally required to make the corporation money. That is the point of a corporation. A corporation is meant to make money. There might be other considerations, but they all come back to making money legally. Everybody in that corporation, if somebody in that corporation decides, I don't like what's going on here because I have a personal ideological issue with something that's going on, like for example, somebody at Apple decided, hey, I don't think that we should be using, hypothetically, slave labor from people in concentration camps like it's Germany in 1944. I don't think we should be doing that. They could be fired. And if they tried to do something to sabotage the bottom line of Apple, there would be an argument and they could possibly go to prison for that because you have to. You are legally required to try to make the company money. And that means that every action they take has to make the company money. And if they're not doing it right, they'll just be fired anyway. So if somebody tries to stop something from happening in the company that's making the company money, the structure is set up to get rid of that person. Possibly by putting them in jail if they've done something bad enough that harms the company, because again, they are fiduciaries. They are required to try and make money. So that's all they do. Corporations make money. That's what they do. They make fucking money. But Sam, corporations do care. They post pride flags and support progressive issues. Yeah, because it makes them sell more fucking Cheetos or Disney tickets. They don't do it because they care. The corporation can't care. They don't. They just care about making money. There might be some executive in there who really cares, but they wouldn't take that action if it didn't make them money. In the 1940s, when Volkswagen was making, cars for the Nazis, they made advertisements using Nazi symbology. Today, they do it with pride flags. And I'm not saying that pride flags are like Nazi flags. What I'm saying is that the only reason that they're doing any of these optics type things, any of these things that promote these social issues that are popular is because it makes them money. They wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. They're fiduciaries. Everything they have to do has to make the corporation money. And it just so happens that when a corporation goes out and they post pride flags and they make products that have rainbows on it, you dumb motherfuckers eat that shit up and you buy it because you're dumb enough to believe that the corporation actually gives a shit about these issues and they're not just playing you to make more money. If tomorrow everyone in America decided, we're not down with the pride stuff anymore, we don't like the pride flag, we all like instead, we like bears. We love bears. Bears are the most popular thing in America. All these companies, they would be posting stuff about how much they love bears. They'd be donating to bear charities and sharing how much they donated because they'll donate that money if it helps them. And then everyone sees that. They're like, oh my God, Halliburton is so good. It doesn't matter that they're bombing, women and children in the Middle East. It's great that they're supporting bears because I love bears. Let's spend money at this corporation. No, they don't give a shit. They want to make money.
They just want to make money. So there's a diffusion of responsibility amongst both the shareholders and the officers and the board of the company. There isn't one individual making these decisions who's held accountable. Essentially, because it's diffused amongst a bunch of different people, nobody gets held accountable. Earlier in this century, and this is the reason why I don't buy a single one of their products to this day, is because the company 3M, they sold earplugs they knew were defective to the U.S. military. And they knew that the lawsuit that would come from selling these defective earplugs would cost them less than remaking those earplugs. So they decided, even though they knew that they were going to eventually get caught, to just put them out. And now I have partial hearing loss because 3M sold defective earplugs to the U.S. military. And the individuals who made those decisions have faced no legal consequences. The company 3M paid a fine that was less than the money they made. And I have partial hearing loss, which gets me a disability rating from the U.S. government. So the taxpayers, not 3M, pay me every month because 3M caused me to lose part of my hearing. And none of those people are held accountable. And if I were to, maybe walk up to one of those 3M executives and be like, hey, you caused me to have hearing loss, so I'm going to smack you in the head with a baseball bat so you get some hearing loss, they'd arrest me. Fucking ridiculous. They did something that made me lose hearing. I want to Hammurabi this shit, and I want to make them lose their hearing too, but I can't. I'm not allowed to. That's not a threat. It's just, it's a wish for a more just world. So yeah. But earplugs to the U.S. military that cause people to have hearing loss, that sounds pretty bad. It's pretty fucked up, but it's not as bad as a lot of the other things that corporations have done. Throughout history, not just in the 21st century or the 20th century, but throughout history. And we're going to talk about a few examples of that because that's what we do here. We talk about historic examples of these things happening to make sense of the 21st century. So the bottom line is that the incentives are fucked up and there's no accountability for the individuals. The incentives, when there's an incentive for people to do something, that means that they are pushed to do that thing for one reason or another. So corporations are not government entities, but they are connected to the government. They often operate in conjunction with the government. So let's talk about a favorite of colonialism, 19th century, the Belgian fucking Congo. So in the Belgian Congo, there's always this excuse from the Belgians that it was a personal colony of the king. So the Belgian people are not responsible for the atrocities that were committed by the Belgian Congo, which includes, whipping people, enslaving them, cutting off their hands if they didn't get enough rubber. Literally, I'm not making this up. This happened, if you haven't heard about it. And this was all under a private corporation owned by the king. And what ended up happening, and this is why, I do defend the Belgian people a little bit, is that there was a public outcry in Belgium. But because it was a personal colony owned by the king, there was less legal recourse for anybody to stop what was going on because it wasn't a Belgian colony. The government didn't have direct capability to stop the violence, even though there was a lot of kickback in Belgium about what was being done to the Congolese people. And eventually it did become too much, and the king decided that he had to stop doing what he was doing, and he turned over the colony to the king, to the state. So the Belgian state begins running this colony, and it gets better. Colonialism is often looked down on. There's pros and cons to it, but it's generally viewed as pretty negative today for good reason. And after the government took over, a lot of these atrocities stopped. Obviously, you're not going to get rid of all the atrocities, but the rate at which they were happening went way down. And that's because governments have a lot more accountability than private corporations. And private corporations are only accountable to their shareholders. So it produces a lot more of these negative things. A lot of the bad things that happened as a result of colonialism while in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries
these things were often committed by private companies, and that kind of gets lost in the history books. It's often discussed that it was the countries that did it, but really it was more like corporations doing it, likely at the behest of the government, but not directly, which seems like it doesn't matter, but it does. It matters. It doesn't, just because the atrocities were often committed by corporations, that doesn't mean that the government is not liable in some way, but it does mean that it was much more difficult for anybody to do anything about these atrocities being committed. So the East India Company and other British corporations, this is another company that was performing some very bad stuff. They were slave trading. They made a lot of money doing it, so they started doing it more. They had this crazy fucking private army. They were going all over the East Indies, which is like India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, other countries around that area, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, all these places. They're trading spices, they're trading slaves, they're making a bunch of money. They have tens of thousands of soldiers. It's insane. They have fleets of ships, and they're doing all this evil shit because they're not being evil because they want to be evil. They're doing evil shit because that's how they made money. They made as much money as possible, and that meant not giving a shit about human beings and their treatment. So the East India Company, like other corporations, like the Belgian Congo Company, whatever it's called, they were ruthless and calculating, because that makes them make more money. And when a corporation makes more money, they grow larger and they're able to continue doing what they're doing. And if another corporation is not willing to do some evil ass shit, but that evil ass shit makes a lot of money for another company, the other company that's willing to do the evil shit is going to become very large, while the company that is not willing to do the evil, very profitable shit is going to fail, or at least grow at a lower rate. So they're not going to become as large. So the corporate structure promotes moral depravity in the pursuit of money. It promotes money over all things, because in the structure of a corporation, the only thing that matters is making money. And they will operate within a legal framework set by a government only if it profits them. So like in the 3M example, when 3M did something illegal, they chose to do something illegal because they knew it would make them money, because they calculated the legal fine they would have. And they knew that as individuals, they would not be held accountable. They knew that the corporation would be held accountable to a certain dollar amount. So they're like, well, we gotta do this for the corporation because we gotta make money. It doesn't matter if the people that signed up to fight America's foreign wars are going to have their hearing loss. They don't give a shit about that. They can't, because they're ruthless, cold, and calculating, because the structure promotes it. That's the incentive of a corporation. They have to be calculating because all that matters is the money. And just like a weaker corporation will lose out market share towards a more strong corporation that makes more money through their ruthlessness, anybody in that company that stops that company from making money will just be gotten rid of. They'll just get rid of them, and they'll find someone else who's willing to do the evil shit to make more money. There's only an incentive to make money above all else. If the legal fine was high enough, or if there was a chance of being shut down, they might think twice about doing something like selling earplugs to the U.S. military that they know are defective. One more example, the Banana Wars. I'm sure you've heard about this. These were wars in the Caribbean, and they were fought by the U.S. government. The U.S. government troops, Marines and soldiers, sailors, they went to the Caribbean and they conquered places. They invaded them and used U.S. troops to take over places for fucking banana companies. They had U.S. troops go in and take over these plantation lands so that these fucking corporations could make money off of selling bananas. They toppled governments for fucking bananas. This happened. They displaced people all over the Caribbean. They had really oppressive conditions. They overthrew local rulers, destabilized the region, because the corporation's interests had to be protected. And the corporations had sway, just like an individual in government might have sway. And as the corporations act as people in their own interest, they are going to use their money. If it can make them more money down the line, they will give money to the government to get to candidates in the government, to political candidates, so that those political candidates will later do things for them in reciprocity. It's also happened in Hawaii. Not about bananas, but about like other types of plantations, sugar plantations, pineapple plantations. And in Hawaii, they overthrew the queen. In the Indian Wars in the U.S., they did the same thing. They were taking over all this land that was historic Native American land, so that they could, grow a bunch of different things. An apple orchard, maybe a corporation wanted to take the land, sell it off to land developers. And there's more, today, domestically. Blackwater, you guys remember Blackwater 10, 15 years ago when it was talked about? It's been talked about a lot recently. Blackwater was this corporation, and there are other ones as well that are private military. They're mercenaries. They would be tasked with going in and doing whatever tasks the Department of Defense wanted them to do. For some reason, if they didn't want the SEALs or JSOC or whoever else to do something, they would have the private military do it. And they committed a lot of atrocities. And that's because, again, this was a corporate structure. They were not beholden to the same regulations as U.S. government troops. They were not beholden to the same responsibilities and reputation of the U.S. government. So while the U.S. government, U.S. military has committed atrocities, these were much more common and prevalent under these private military corporations. And we're down to the most disgusting domestic example, which is private prisons, specifically private prisons for kids. I am against private prisons in all cases because I think like I said before, the incentives are fucked up. There was a scandal called the Cash for Kids scandal. Literally, cash for kids. It's what it sounds like. Judges sold kids to a private prison. They sold fucking children to a private prison. Kids would come in to the judge. The judge would get a kickback of a few $1,000s, and they would give exorbitant sentences to these children in exchange for the money from that private prison corporation, because the private prison had the incentive to make as much money as possible. So if they can bribe a judge a few $1,000s to get some poor kid into their prison, into their juvenile detention center, and they might make $2,000 a month off of that kid, they're going to do it. It's a simple accounting problem. The kid's life doesn't matter to them because what matters is making the money. Some of these kids had extreme issues afterwards. One of them killed himself. There's a video online, a horrible video online, content warning, I should have put this before, that one of these children killed himself after going to prison for some dumb shit, for some really minor stuff. And there's a video of this poor mother confronting this judge as he was found out and arrested. And she's obviously distraught because she's lost her son. And this judge is the one who directly caused his death. And the judge got a few years in prison, but, there's no punishment for what he did that would be good enough. There's nothing on earth that you could do to this guy who sold, I think, hundreds of kids to a private prison and did enormous harm to them. And you know what? That's just domestically. There's also international corporations. Domestic companies are bad, but the international ones are the ones that can get away with a lot more shit. Because if something's not happening to Americans or Canadians or French or English, like Western European people, it's cared about a lot less in the West. It really is. And the international corporations, they can kind of do whatever they want because they can hide it pretty well when it happens in, Tanzania or Malaysia or Myanmar or El Salvador, something like that. For one example, companies making electric cars, any company making electric cars, this cobalt, recently it was on Joe Rogan, the cobalt mines. In these cobalt mines, there's a lot of child labor, there's adult labor, they don't have any protection equipment, personal protection equipment, there's excessive death,
These people are being exploited. There's cave-ins, and it would be a minor expense relatively to give these people some personal protection equipment and some better working conditions and likely higher pay so that kids don't have to work and possibly die. Possibly for some of them, but they do die, and they know that they're going to die. But it doesn't happen because these corporations know that it would cost more to them to give these people these conditions, to give these people normal working conditions where they're actually protected, versus paying off the local militia to chase off journalists. And, I'm speculating, but I assume that in one of these cases, somebody has been killed because that's what happens. So we're going to come back for a moment to the hypothetical. So obviously it wasn't a hypothetical. Nike, Adidas, BMW, and a bunch of other companies have been found by the U.S. government to be using slave labor from Uyghur concentration camps. So there is a genocide going on in China against an ethnic group called the Uyghurs, who are primarily Muslim. The Uyghurs are in concentration camps being used as slave labor to produce goods that are in a lot of these products from Nike, Adidas, BMW, and other companies. So because there's so much money to be made in using this cheap labor, there's nothing cheaper than slave labor because you're not paying them. That's how slavery works. That's why it's fucking evil. These companies make so much money, and they only care about making money so much that when there was a bill introduced in Congress to stop goods that were made by slave labor from concentration camps in China, Nike and Coca-Cola, amongst others, lobbied against the bill. Nike and Coca-Cola used money to stop a bill that would stop slave labor goods from entering the United States. Okay? That's a thing that they did. They gave money to try to successfully stop a bill that would allow them to continue to use slave labor in their products. Because all they care about is making money. That's it. That's at the bottom line. If you take one thing away from this episode, is that a corporation only wants to make money. If you think a corporation cares about gay people, they don't. They want to make money. If you think a corporation cares about sexual assault survivors, they don't. They want to make money. If you think a corporation has a Christian leaning, they don't. They want to make money. This is, public corporations. Some private corporations, this might not be the case, depending on how they're structured, but most of the companies are public. So any public corporation, they just want to make money. That's it. If they don't make money, or if they're not trying to make money, then the people who are fucking it up and not making money, they're gone. And they're going to find people that are going to make money. They're going to find people that are ruthless and calculating and do whatever they can to create more profit margins. And they'll do anything, clearly anything, So this happens because politicians are, at least in theory, accountable to the people. They're accountable to individual people in the country that they're politicians in. In practice, you guys know how I feel about that. They're not really accountable to the people. They are in theory, and sometimes they give lip service to it, but really they're unfortunately accountable to the same corporations that are doing this evil shit. But you know what corporations are accountable to? To their shareholders. Corporations are only accountable to the people that own stock in that company, which is people like you and me who buy, index funds and own part of those companies or buying those companies directly. They only work for the individual shareholders, which means that they only work to make money. So this is the situation. That's the situation. The situation is that corporations exist, they do evil shit, and all they do is try to make money, and they do it in the face of everything righteous and good and kind, and they don't care. They will be as evil as possible as long as it makes them money. But there is a catch. And that catch, which I've touched on earlier, is that you can change the incentives for these corporations. While something like a boycott hasn't been known to work very well, there's been a little bit of research on it, and they don't seem to really affect how a corporation acts. What I can say is that I know in the 19th century, corporations were doing much more evil shit. If a company was doing stuff like the Belgian Congo was doing, it would probably be found out. And honestly, they are doing things that are pretty close to it, especially like, the Uyghur stuff. But that's for a small amount of goods. It's not Apple directly taking people and putting them in camps. But in the 19th century, corporations were taking people and putting them in camps and essentially enslaving them. So we're past it a little bit. There's a lot of evil shit that goes on. But if the corporation finds out that if they do that evil shit, that they will lose money, then they won't do the evil shit. So if it's possible, one way to stop this would be to hugely fine companies for wrongdoing that we want to stop. That's how you incentivize them to not do the evil shit. You make sure that they know that if they do something bad, they're going to be fined. I don't love it when someone is made an example of, but in the case of a corporation that's doing something evil, if they were to receive a massive fine for it that made them lose a lot of money or possibly go bankrupt, other corporations, they would look at that. The lawyers that work for that corporation would look at that and be like, well, we can't do this because if we do it, there's a high enough chance that we're going to get destroyed by it, that we're going to lose our company. So we're not going to do it because we're not going to make money. You have to force them because the incentive structure of a corporation is just to make money. So you have to force them. You have to disincentivize the evil actions. You have to make sure that they know that if they do the evil shit, they're not going to make any fucking money. If they can do the evil shit, they can get away with it and they can make money. They're going to do it 100 out of 100 times. Every single time they will do it. If there's no monetary consequences, they will fucking do it and they will always do it. If 3M, which got fined $75 million for these earplugs, which is fucking nothing in this grand scheme of everything, they thought at the beginning they were going to be fined $2 billion, they would have remade those fucking earplugs and I might be able to hear a little bit better. But they knew they would only get fined a small amount and they would make more money off of the deal. So they were like, it's fine. It's fine. We know we're going to make out okay. So let's do it. But if they thought they were going to be fined $2 billion, they wouldn't have fucking done it. You got to disincentivize. You got to de-incentivize. You got to make sure that they will not take those actions. Another thing you can do is you can make the individuals in that corporation personally responsible. There's lots of discussion today about, holding police officers accountable as individuals, not like holding them personally accountable so that, and this does happen in some places, and you should be doing the same for for people in positions of power in corporations, because they are individuals making choices and they're part of this organization, which sometimes protects them. But if the individuals in that company, if they knew that if they do something that they're going to go to jail themselves or they're going to be fined and they're going to lose their home and their family and everything like that, they're not going to do it. But they, in the sense that they know that they're not going to get in trouble personally, there's nothing stopping them from doing it. And in fact, they fully understand that they can do whatever they want within that corporation if they're not going to be held personally liable and if it's going to make the company money. Because there's a psychological shift with this diffusion of responsibility where these people know that they're only a small part of it. It's like, well, it's okay. It's okay if we use a little bit of slave labor. It's fine, this would happen anyway. They would get someone else to do it, which is true. They're right. They would get someone else to do it if they didn't do it. So they're like, well, I guess we're going to do it. I guess we're going to use the slave labor. And then they, hop in their BMW and they drive to Starbucks and get a triple macchiato or whatever it is they like to drink. And they go home to their penthouse or wherever they live and they sip their fucking red wine and they somehow sleep at night, knowing that their actions directly are related to people being enslaved across the globe. Another thing you can do is not allow things to be private that should be public. So there are some specifics, some of which we talked about today. Don't make prisons private. When there's private prisons, there is an incentive for that corporation that runs that private prison to get more people into prison. So private prisons will do things like lobby the government for stricter sentences, because if they know that if they get stricter sentences, they will have people in prison longer, which makes them more money, which is fucking disgusting. The police. Don't privatize the police. I've seen a few articles about this recently. It's crazy. That's how you get RoboCop. You get it down eventually where it's going to be like fucking Uber. Like you're going to have police that are like on call basically, where they'll deputize some fucking moron who's 24 when they need more cops. There's a surge. They're going to pay you $25, $30 an hour to be a cop. And then you have some idiot coming out in fucking basketball shorts and flip-flops beating the shit out of somebody because they needed more cops. So they did like the gig economy for police. Don't fucking do that. Toll roads. Toll roads shouldn't be fucking private. Easy Pass can go fuck itself. That shit is so annoying to be going through, because if anybody has ever gotten a fine from Easy Pass or something, they charge you exorbitant amounts of money because they're trying to make as much money as possible. They're not providing a public service. They're trying to make as much money as possible because that's what the corporation does. A few years ago, there was issues with traffic cams where the traffic cams were set up in a certain way that they would give somebody a ticket if they went through it. So they like shortened the yellow light so that people would get a ticket even though they weren't supposed to get a ticket. And people died because they were like trying to avoid getting a ticket. So they were slamming on their brakes. It happened a few times where people died. These types of things should not be private. Don't listen to a corporation telling you they're woke. They're not. They don't give a shit. If you're woke, you're probably not listening to this fucking podcast. It's not made for you. If you are woke, if you consider yourself woke and you're listening to this, thank you. I appreciate you for hearing me out. But please don't give money to corporations because they put shit out on Pride Month. It's not a fucking thing. They don't care about Pride Month. They don't. They just want to make more money, and they know that if they do that, that it makes them money. They don't give a shit. Halliburton and Raytheon, they celebrate all these things, all this woke shit, like Hispanic Heritage Month and Gay Pride Month, which, you know, I'm not against these things. They have their place, but they'll just go with whatever's trendy because they know it makes them money and it helps their optics. But with cases of defense companies, they're doing this while they're lobbying the government to create more wars, and they're fucking selling weapons to people who are bombing children. It's just about the fucking money. It's always bottom line about the money. Don't listen to any other reason. It's about the money. So how do corporations fit into our culture? They legally function as people, and they do everything they can to make money. I know I said that about 15 times here. The people that work for them are protected. That's that limited liability that they have. So they're able to take some really unethical actions without any personal consequences, and often even consequences for the corporation. Ultimately, if you were to ask me, I would say that you should buy local and buy from small businesses. You know, there's lots of money that can stay in your community from people that you can help. You know, your neighbors, people that live in the towns next to you. There's lots of businesses locally that you can give your money to so that it stays around rather than going to these large international corporations. And, you know, you don't know where that money's going. It's going to like Martha's Vineyard. Fuck them. They don't need it. Keep it in your own community. Buy local. And please join the Discord with the link in the description to share whatever ideas or thoughts you have on this episode or any other episode. Share ideas with me that an episode that you might want. You know, not that many people listen to this. A few people do, but you know, if you send me something, I'm gonna respond. So if you have anything you want me to touch on, I will do it. I'm currently writing an episode that somebody gave me the idea on Twitter, and they joined the Discord, and they shared an idea with me, and that's what the next episode's going to be on. So please join the Discord. Link is in the description, and share your ideas with us, because that's really where you can learn a lot, is when you communicate with other people your own ideas, and they'll share their specific ideas on what you said. You know, listening is one thing, but actually engaging with the information is a lot more useful for you. I guarantee it. So, yeah, thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.